Yeah, you put that one on. Hi, everyone. We have our last speaker.
And once again, you deserve a free drink or something.
Thank you for sticking around. And he's a writer, a researcher, and recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship. And he's also the author of the New York Times blog .earth, which was ranked by Times Magazine in 2013 as one of the top 25 blogs. He's also a senior fellow at Pace University. And so if we can give a warm welcome to our last speaker, Andy Revkin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's really a privilege to be here. My brother's in the audience. Thank you for coming, Jim. He's a local. My focus is on communication. My role at Pace University, I'm senior fellow for environmental understanding. I'm not a journalism professor. I'm not even a communications professor, although all the courses that I teach relate to communication. I try to understand how you make information matter. I spent 30 years just as a journalist, and I realized there's big limits to what you can do with journalism. There's big limits to what you can do with advocacy. All these tools, these issues are prismatic. Having an effective law only works if you have public education. It only works if you have governance. So if you're not focused on all of those arenas, but what is the one thing that knits all of them? Communication, the ability that our last speaker had to come here virtually is just one small example. Twitter is another. You'll see some tweets that I did from this meeting earlier today to try to expand this meeting out of the room. We live at a time when it's unbelievably possible, as it's never been possible, to have a global conversation about these globalizing pipelines. Think of all the issues we've talked about today involve multiple countries, multiple languages, multiple cultures. And yet we have this ability to transcend those distances and even languages with these tools we have. But I always put an asterisk on the yes on this question, because it only happens if you go into this arena with intentionality. There, as you'll see and as you heard earlier, there's ways to use these same tools in counterproductive ways if you care about elephant conservation or human rights or the like. Very briefly, because I know it's been a long day, my passion for this stuff started pretty early. Before I was a journalist, right after college, I got to spend time on a sailboat. It's a long story, traveling 2/3 of the way around the world. A whole other story. Just Google for Revkin and Wanderlust, which was the name of the boat, if you want to learn more. But when we arrived in Djibouti after a very long voyage across the Indian Ocean. This was in 1980, and I took this picture on a street corner there. This was like my first. I got a degree in biology as an undergraduate in 1978, but this was really the first time I kind of thought about the word unsustainable. Something about these piles of leopard skins, which were being sold mostly to French Foreign Legion soldiers who were there. It felt profoundly unsustainable. And now, fast forward, I've been writing about issues related to biological conservation for, again, many decades. And the 21st century issues are everything from bushmeat to shark fins. And what we forget, though, is that we had our own little ecocide here. It's so much of what we've been talking about today is, oh, woe is me, those people in peri-Saharan Africa, they need to fix their problem. Oh, those Chinese, they need to stop their appetite. This is bison skulls that were turned into carbon black if you charred the bison skull. They were gathered from all across the Great Plains and brought to the east to turn into pigment for ink. At least we got full use out of the animals. We were turning their skulls into pigment. And the passenger pigeon was the ultimate example of billions of birds. There's a book now, From Billions to Zero. Actually, it was a film. We had this unbelievable capacity to destroy even these ridiculously, monumentally bountiful amounts of critters. And one of the things, this gets to the fact that communication is not always your friend. If you're a passenger pigeon, as I learned, this was the 100th anniversary of the extinction of this bird this year. And Carl Zimmer did a really good piece in the New York Times about it. And he mentioned this anecdote was fascinating to me, and I wrote about it on my blog as well. The telegraph allowed word to get out. So the pigeons are here. People used to send messages, and then trainloads of people would come out to massacre the pigeons when they were roosting in a particular area. So that was the Twitter of the time, the telegraph, and it amplified and accelerated the slaughter. So anyone who thinks that this is just sort of an internet phenomenon is missing history. And here's, in the year 2000, of course, my friend Keith Clure, who was writing at Audubon magazine at the time, was starting to write about how eBay and these online selling tools were starting to be co-opted by wildlife poachers and traffickers in ways that were really disturbing. And this was an interview he did with a Fish and Wildlife Service agent who they were able to track down some people. So that was 2000. 2005, the story about the internet was still the downside, that it's a place to facilitate a lot of these illegal activities. And then you saw things started to change. This is eBay. If you go on eBay right now, they have a list of what they try not to sell. But eBay is largely self-policed. It's policed by buyers and sellers. There's no official police, which can be a good thing in the end. Tens of millions of eyeballs, if they're educated about these issues, can actually go a long way towards stemming back bad practices. But I just did this little search. This is just yesterday or the day before. There's a website, exoticanimals4sale.net. You saw another one earlier. What was the other one we saw? Exotic meat. So these are just some, and these are not necessarily illegal. They're probably, a lot of these are farmed animals, but they're, I'm looking for a squirrel monkey or looking for a finger monkey, a marmoset, have wanted one for many years. The appetite is there. We are wanting an adult capuchin to join our home, blah, blah, blah. Here, this was Jessica. This is just yesterday. In Florida, I have 10 female kinkajous. Again, this is all the quote-unquote legitimate legal trade in these animals that are bred in captivity, horrific as it may be. But if this is the overt stuff, you can just click on Google. You know that there's a lot of illicit stuff as well. And that's the downside. Now, there's lots of other downsides to the internet, one of which is that social media, we all feel bathed these days in too much information, TMI. And I, for one, I feel like I've got 3 or 4 fire hoses pointed at me 24/7 as a blogger for the New York Times. One of them is population and economics. One of them is climate change. Well, 2 of them are probably climate change and energy. And another one is conservation issues. And I'm just buffeted. So you think, God, well, why should I go on Twitter when I already have all this stuff? But I think Twitter is actually a marvelous tool for convening, the same kind of convening power that's in this room, just spread more broadly. The hashtag is your friend. On Twitter, it was an invention. That's what's so cool about this arena. Inventions are not just technologies anymore. This guy, Chris Messina, who worked at the company that invented Firefox, that browser, in 2007, he proposed this norm of using a pound sign ahead of a word or phrase or code as a way to have a conversation amid all that noise. And that has spread now to become a wonderful way to engage, to get sense out of all that sound. So this is, Twitter. There's actually there's a global map of Twitter activity, and of course it looks like just a morass of stuff. That's the noise, but hashtags give you signal. These are all, my PACE blogging course has that hashtag, educational technology, agriculture, Ag Chat. These are weekly or daily or 24/7 discussions about how to get best practices in agriculture. EnviroEd is environment in the classroom. Wildlife trafficking is obviously what it is. Bird class, here at the University of Connecticut, there's a great bird behavior teacher who requires her students to tweet when they're out of classroom. If they see birds doing something interesting, they have to tweet about it, which is kind of funny, tweeting about bird behavior. But they use that hashtag as a brand. So their learning is spilling out of the classroom, and that's what I love. That's why all my courses at PACE have a hashtag. And so you can have this public learning process. Bird class has become a go-to place for people who've seen a bird, some unusual bird behavior or bird. They then tweet, hey, why this looks like a golden eagle, but I don't know that they were in Arizona. And they'll include that hashtag in it, and then people in that class and people who've kind of started to be interested in bird behavior can answer the question for them. So it's a great organizing tool. I did a couple of tweets earlier today from here. There's one at Quinnipiac U, meeting on wildlife trafficking. That's Michael Harris. Is he still here? Yeah. He notes for every wild African lion, there are about 80 in captivity in the USA. So I'm starting to spread this discussion out of here. This is just a random secondary tweet by someone on Chinese presidential entourage smuggle ivory. It's a way to spread information peer-to-peer that doesn't require the New York Times necessarily. And that I think is very important as well. The New York Timeses of this world are shrinking, remember. So if we're not, as communities, expanding into that space, then there'll be either noise or counter-information, misinformation. There's some NGO, I mean, so many NGOs, including the one you just heard about, are doing great work to at both ends of the pipeline. Like, and this isn't about trafficking. This is about just corporate practices that are endangering species in other ways. Greenpeace has done very effective programs against to force companies that use palm oil to think more carefully about where they get their palm oil, because it's endangering the habitat of. We heard about the importance of habitat. You know, it's great to have orangutans at zoos, but it would be better to have them in Borneo. But if you don't care where your Kit Kat bar palm oil came from, then you're facilitating the extinction of orangutans in the wild. So Greenpeace and other organizations have been very good at informing consumers. And oops, I went backwards. Sorry, I'll just show you here. They several years ago they did a campaign pressing Nestle, which makes a lot of candy, using palm oil, to start sourcing its palm oil more responsibility. So not only would Greenpeace and its Indonesian and Malaysian partners exposing illegal practices on the ground in Indonesia, they're also working with consumers to say, when you eat a Kit Kat bar, you're eating orangutan, essentially, if you're not thinking about it. And it actually prompted change practices, along with other trends. Corporate social responsibility is actually something that can happen. It only happens, though, if there's certain kinds of pressures. Some of it can be litigation, but most of it will be consumer-led pressure and with ground truthing at the other end. There's other great ways to use these tools. I'm going to show you a very fun example from there was a college student in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a couple of years ago, who, as a student project, he created an artwork to foster understanding of endangered species issues. And it was a Facebook project. So look at this right now. How many of you are on Facebook or know about it? Right. Okay, so this looks like a Facebook conversation, right? Where you'll see you and your cousin or some friends will have a conversation about the latest cat video. So here, the conversation is, Tiger says, totally screwed, like 3,200 of me left, sad face. Panda likes this. But then Panda says, I don't mean like good. I mean like I feel you, bro. I'm about 2,500 now. And Marine Turtle says, oh no, really? I'm about that sad face. Rhino, doubtful. You can see that sounds like a rhino, actually. Mountain Gorilla says, shut up, Rhino, don't be such a negative Nancy. They go on and on and on. Polar Bear, blah, blah, blah. Human says, point taken, guys. This whole thing was not a conversation. I mean, he created this using Photoshop or whatever. And then he plunked it on Facebook, and it went around tens of thousands of shares. It was a very successful campaign linked to World Wildlife Fund project on endangered species. So, and it all started with a college student in Halifax. I mean, we're not talking about, CBS News or the Comedy Channel. This is just, it's great. You've never had if you have a good idea, a creative way of conveying information, you can really dive in and make a difference. My students at Pace University, we have a new course. It's an environmental policy clinic, and where they work on real-world issues with partners. There was an NGO in New York State trying to pass a law to bar traveling circuses that use elephants and other exotic animals for all the reasons you know. And the mantra of our campaign was this: you can't have a tamed elephant without abusing it. And the video is about 30 seconds. And it's worth seeing. It was created by undergraduate students.
Get off, man. Tear that foot off. Sink it in his foot. Tear it off. Make him scream.
And that's their blog, so that you go there and there's lots more information on the legislation, and it'll take years, as you've heard before. None of this is instant turnaround, but you try to build awareness and work as you can, generation by generation, and you can make a difference. And I really like the idea that everyone can get involved. In my blog, I've written about this stuff a lot. There's a wonderful photographer, Nick Brandt, who's taken these extraordinary portraits of elephants, which are very different than the pictures you normally see. It's literally like, if you think about the famous, there was some great portrait photographers for humans who had the same approach. And so I featured his work one day, but then I realized, you know, I'm transitioning to something here. I realized I've got to make sure that other people can read this too. So I had a grad student at Pace who's Chinese, and who's an English-Chinese translator, and I had him translate my piece into Chinese and posted that as a separate piece and sent it to people who could make sure it gets around in China, for those in China who actually have access to the New York Times, of course. But that says, you know, if there isn't homegrown work in China in the areas that are the demand source for lots of these products coming from endangered species, we're not going to have success. Because a lot of people aren't going to read the New York Times in Beijing. But here, like here in Vietnam, there's growing efforts to use YouTube and other channels in Vietnamese by Vietnamese NGOs. This is envietnam.org is kind of a hybrid international and Vietnamese environmental group. And these are shots from a video that they have that's trying to make the connection between the rhino drug, and where it comes from. And the video is horrific. That's a living rhino over there, not a dead one. And then you have wonderful people like Jackie Chan who are diving and using their celebrity to make the point about rhino horn as well. And of course, Yao Ming, probably the most famous activist focusing on rhino and elephant and shark fin. This picture is unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. And I've featured him on .earth a lot. And there are changes underway in China. Like on shark fin, it's more advanced. Shark fin they started the shark fin efforts in the mid-2000s. And the pressure, which has come largely through social media, I would assert, has prompted the government. Remember, the middle class is becoming enough of a force there. Not only do they have to clean up their air pollution, but they have to sort of think more seriously about issues like shark depletion, because middle class cares about the environment increasingly. This is I wrote several pieces about the campaign that was underway there to do this. This is one, but I want to show you just to conclude. When I was in Beijing, actually, let me back up so I can introduce it. I was in Beijing recently, and this was a little over a year ago, and I heard that there was a shark fin event, Wild Aid, which is a very creative NGO working with people in China and elsewhere around the world on endangered species trading. They really pushed hard on shark fins, and their China campaign director will explain a really important point.
What's been your sense of how it's changed here for awareness of this issue?
It's a huge change. Before 2005, nobody really know that was an issue for sharks. When we did the survey, 70% of people didn't even know that shark fin soup come from shark, because for Chinese words, 鱼翅 didn't name as shark fin. So they didn't know so much a shark being killed because shark fin soup. So with all the information and message we're sending out, definitely completely changing their perspective of shark fin soup. Last year we get all the reports, the sales dropped 50%. Half acre. So people right now really don't think it is cool things to eat shark fin. Before they think it's show-off things has to be on the table, but now they do not believe it.
So what's the thing that was so interesting, when they did surveys before they did their campaign, it's really important to know what people know and don't know. The majority of Chinese didn't even know that shark fin soup has shark fin in it, because the name in Chinese doesn't have the word shark in it. So that tells you where to start. That soup has shark in it. And that, to me, is vitally important. And so it says not only do you think about translation, but if it's not culturally, if you're not scoping out how to make your message meaningful, then you could just be yelling into a windstorm and not make a difference. Their work is fantastic. Their approach is really important, and that transcends just the China question. And just to conclude, I've been writing a lot about species. I was really sad a number of years ago. This was the first time I had to write it. Well, actually, there was a monkey species. I had to write essentially the obituary for a species. This was the other one I had to do. And it makes you really, appreciate where we're at as this age, the Anthropocene, the age of us. There are going to be a lot of losses, and especially in river systems, the Yangtze where you have a very constrained ecosystem and so much pressure. The thing that killed the Baiji, this river dolphin there, wasn't overfishing, it wasn't ship traffic, it wasn't pollution, it was kind of all of the above. It was just 400 million people in that watershed are incompatible with this dolphin species that have been there for 20 million years. So there will be losses, but you have to figure out, so what do you do? Part of what I think you're seeing is in China and other rapidly developing countries, they're going through the same process we went through in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, 60s. The Hudson River, we had our ecocide, and one of the species we almost lost is the Atlantic sturgeon. I've been out on the river and seen the adult sturgeon, and I was out on an educational program a couple of years ago when they were netting off the Clearwater, the boat that Pete Seeger built with others. And in my other life, I'm a musician. I've played with him many times. And this spectacular moment came of renewal, which looked like this.
This is the first one we've caught this year.
That's a baby Atlantic sturgeon.
They get huge.
That's me releasing a big one after a tagging exercise.
Incredible.
So you can have renewal, but we're at this juncture, where there's a lot of stuff circling the drain, and that's why the work of everyone, lawyers, communicators, educators, is vital. Now, one little irony that gets at the complexities of all this, and our ESA expert will understand this, when the Clearwater crew caught that Atlantic sturgeon, they violated the Endangered Species Act. They lost their permit to do educational programs netting in the river. So it's complicated. They have their permit back, but that just shows you just how weird this whole arena is. So I'll thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer a few questions. Yeah.
Great stuff, and someday you have to give me a private lesson.
Sure.
I wonder if you could talk about how we can help form partnerships. As you point out, you've got good communications, great advocates, but they weren't aware of the law. So I can see, okay, we should have had lawyers in that circle or just more people informed about the law. And I wonder if you can talk about maybe helpful ways to form partnerships or examples of partnerships you've seen that have been very effective.
Well, I think groups like Wild Aid, I think, are really the perfect example of having indigenous, local entities that they partner with to do their activism. Greenpeace is the same way in South Asia. But if you're not on the ground or at least integrated carefully with the local cultures, then it's really not going to work very well. If you mean interdisciplinary partnerships,
yeah, I'm thinking of interdisciplinary.
That's challenging. It's challenging in the New York Times to have an interdisciplinary team focused on a story. It's challenging at every university I've been to, including the one I work at. That just requires crosstalk, getting people in the same room. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to on sustainability at universities that don't have the business school present, which is a totally lost opportunity. They need to be in the room, and that's kind of part of the real world aspects of this. It'd be interesting to have. There's other perspectives on that issue of whether you want to sustain a market approach to rhino horn or not. Because I'm a blogger, I'm kind of a middle child. He's my older brother. I have a younger sister, so I really am a middle child. And there's actually a pretty decent argument by some for rhino horn farming and that approach too. But having them in the room at the same time would be interesting, because then you can sort of resolve. Well, what can we hash out there? What can we agree on? I think it's important too.
I've been toying with the idea of trying to advocate for creating counterfeit rhino horn powder.
Sure, it's
to
just
destroy the
carrots.
market, right? And then
we
there
can
are
all
other,
contribute our fingernails.
I mean, there are other examples of this, and unless the purchasers have DNA testing, they won't know. But I do think that the business component of the interdisciplinary team and just the notion of economics, and to some extent what Joe talked about earlier, which is some utilitarian compromise in trying to figure out what we can do, as you point out, things circle the drain.
Yeah, it's like, and again, the time element is what gets everybody all riled up. There's so many things that are going to blink out in the next couple of decades if we're not really pushing hard. But it still gets to this question. I forgot his name, the guy who just spoke. The one question I wanted to ask him, where he said, he recognized that middle class in China or Vietnam, they're not going to quickly change over. In other words, there's a period of time when the demand is still going to be high for a long time. And that's where I hear from the market-based people that, for these stockpiles could work as a buffer, like a way to feed that demand. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying it's like another way to calculate the issue. And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You want, and one thing, whether you want that approach or the strict no harvest approach, you need better governance in developing countries. I mean, that's the one thing you absolutely need, and more crackdowns on the flow. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but we could go on for days on that. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, just one of our email questions, actually, you just kind of answered it. It was what can be done to strike a balance between the need to preserve and protect wildlife, and where places like the Congo Basin, there's hunting for protein, for the need.
Sure.
For protein. Yeah.
Well, I've heard there's, the bushmeat trade. There's discussions about farming certain kinds of animals to supply meat that people in urban centers. A lot of the bushmeat trade goes into the cities in Africa to satisfy the need of the growing middle class there who still want to eat some traditional food. So do you farm that too? Or do you? Not everyone is going to move to veganism right away. So these they're interesting questions. About especially in that transitional period where, as I said, keep in mind, like on there's also a Yangtze River sturgeon that's going down the tubes. Can they leapfrog past the things that we've done? Is there a way for developing countries as they do this fast transition to other kinds of bigger economies, can they avoid the mistakes? Do they have to do the passenger pigeon thing? So, and that's, I don't know. I don't know I don't know all the answers. Any other questions?
I just had a quick comment.
Yeah.
What you were saying with the shark fin soup. In Chinese, the word for ivory is tooth. So I've seen some. So in Chinese, the word for ivory translates as tooth. So I've seen some surveys by International Fund for Animal Welfare saying that some or a majority of Chinese people actually don't realize that elephants have to be killed for ivory. So that survey of what people understand the product to be from, I think, is extremely.
Well, that's why the work that Jackie Chan and others are doing is just so important. Just getting some basic ideas across. That I think is it's really important. And every one of these videos that they produce is out in Chinese and in English. It's not just in English.
如果你购买犀牛角，你不仅仅把钱花在犀牛角上，还等于购买枪支、子弹、毒箭、电锯、斧头、屠刀来砍掉犀牛的脸，还杀死这么美丽的动物。所以，请告诉你的亲朋好友，永远不要购买犀牛角制品，没有买卖就没有杀害。
That's an actual. He was in the studio with an actual rhino, by the way. There's another video on YouTube of him, of like the outtakes it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild, literally. So anyway, that stuff is really important.
Do you have an opinion on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Project to do something with crushed elephants, to make an art project out of it?
I wrote about that, and there's mixed feelings, even among artists, about whether that's just perpetuating, glorifying the material, or unethical or not. In fact, I wrote a piece about it, and I presumed there's an artist, a fashion artist in New York City, who I presumed would think it was a great idea, and she said no. Yeah. I'll just show you. So. All right, here's the piece I did about this. And I updated the piece because
Asher J.
Right, I said, here's what I initially said. I know at least one artist, Asher J, who almost assuredly come up with an idea. Then I had to update it. Boy, was I wrong. And I included a long discussion from her. I mean, that's why, for me, on these wicked issues, whether it's global warming, which is very wicked, prismatic, or these kinds of problems, what I try to do is facilitate constructive discussion to find out, well, where are some points where we can all agree? And it's so wonderful for me when this kind of thing happens, because it's a way for me to engage and figure out next steps that sort of can be broadly accepted.
Okay.
Had you seen that? Is that why?
No, I know about it, and I know about Asher J, and it makes no sense to me to try to tell people that you can, make art, which is why we're so upset, because so many people are making art, in China.
Well, although, like suppose if you went at it as a way to hark back to, in an ironic way, to what happened with the bison skulls. As charred bison skulls became pigment. And you could make some points in the art that would sort of make that point. But then if in a purely ethical sense, you would say, well, it's like using a corpse to make art. There's just no way you can get around that.
Right.
And that just gets to the range of views we'll always have on these issues. I don't think there's any magic bullet.
Right.
Anyway, thank you very much for hanging in there. I learned a lot today. Get on Twitter.
Thank you, everybody who came and who stayed throughout the day. Thank you so much.